Chubby with Kip's Corner. Welcome back. And if you're new, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to start a series of 2 journals that I'm making. They will both be journals that I will create from an old Reader's Digest book covers, but the 2 covers are going to be very different. The insides will be similar in that they'll both be woodland themed, but one is going to be more of a mixed media cover and the other is going to be more of a paper covered, art paper covered cover. Does that make sense? Covered cover. The mixed media one will use fabric, the other one will use paper. And so I'm going to make them completely different. One is a journal that will likely be available in my Etsy store, and the other is a journal that will be a custom order. So I want to start from the very, 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 very beginning. A lot of people ask, do you start with the insides or do you start with the cover? And my answer is that I tend to start with the cover. And the only reason I do that is because I generally have an idea in my head of what I want the cover to look like. It doesn't always turn out like what's in my head, but it's a starting point. And so it's easier for me to dive into the project, getting that thought process or that idea of the cover kind of out of my head. And then I can focus on the inside. And then I usually create the inside to go with what I've done on the cover, if that makes any sense. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't start with or play with things. As a matter of fact, yesterday for these journals, I made a few pockets and just playing around and sewing and laying them out. So these will go into the journals I'm creating, and they're already done and made. So, and I've also got some pages printed out for some of the pages. So I have begun a little bit of work on the inside, but generally I tend to start with the outside first. So I was gifted a very large quantity of old Reader's Digest condensed books. Some are in great shape, some are not. And these books have gorgeous covers. You know, these covers would be just fine, just covering the spine and using them as is. That was one of the cool things about Reader's Digest condensed books is the covers were all different, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. But I do not feel guilty about giving them new life. In this particular instance, these books were sitting on a shelf. A friend of mine bought a new home, and the books came with the home. And so I am going to give them a new life and use them for my covers. So the way I start generally with gutting a book, I'll start from the very, very beginning here, is I put a fresh blade in my X-Acto knife, and I use an X-Acto knife. So if you're going to use one, be very careful. They are sharp. And I've had my fair share of cuts, finger cuts with X-Acto knives. So I don't want the same thing to happen to anybody else. So be careful. I generally open the book and just push down here, separating that end paper a little bit if I can from the spine, and just give it a good push down. And you can kind of hear it begin to separate just a little. I'm not putting too much pressure on there, but I am just opening that up a little bit. And then I put the book upright like this and you can see where it's begun to come away. And very carefully, I'm just ripping that first layer of paper initially. And so I pull it away and just kind of stick my finger in there just to give me a little bit more space. And again, be careful. And then from there, I just, again, gently, you don't want to push down so hard that you go all the way through to the actual spine. Otherwise, you'll get slits in the spines. I've done that too. And if you do, it's an easy repair, but you're better off not doing that. So once I've got one separated, and I just go move and do the exact same thing. Push down just a little bit through here just to get that paper begun to separate a little. I generally put it on its side, and I can see where that paper is, where it's just paper holding it together. Now, some books have different types of glue. Some are a little more difficult. Some are connected more to the spine. You just have to work with it. And there you go. Done. And not done. Almost done. There we go. Done. Now the guts, what I typically do, especially for Reader's Digest condensed books, I will flip through this later and just see if there's any pictures in here that I can use, any images that I can use at some point in something I'm doing. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. It just depends. Then I can also use these pages as glue sheets just while I'm gluing to protect my table. And they can also be used as pockets. Would you do page pockets? You know, kind of like this where you've used a page in the background. You can do that. And then you also can take the, I won't do it now, but you can take off this glue piece, this spine piece here. And then this can be used also at some point in a journal. So it just depends on how the book was made, what's there, what you do with it. So I'm going to set that aside for now. And this one now is ready for me to begin working on. So it's very simple. You just have to be careful. We're going to do this one as well. Now this one is in a little worse shape. It's got a little bit of cracking started, but that's okay because I will basically repair that as I'm working on the spine. And I'm going to be adding enough to the cover that I will be able to make it sturdy and protected, and it won't be an issue. So even if the spine is, or the book is in bad shape, sometimes the spine is completely unusable. In that case, I could just make a new spine. But in this case, these are in pretty good shape, or good enough anyway. And so I'm just going to, I don't have a whole lot of repair work or creating or building parts to it that I need to do. So there we go. And that's as simple as that. That's all you do. And this is ready to go. Now, if I have a lot of, you know, loose paper here, I will pull that off. In this case, actually, I'm, see, you talked about the spine. I'm not going to because it's connected to the spine, which is cracking. So we will get a nice repair job going on that one with some book tape. So that's the first step. That's it. It's as simple as that. I will be back in just a minute to show you the next thing I do. Okay, I've got my cover is gutted and ready to go. And I'm going to set that aside for now. And I have this beautiful sheet of textured paper. It's a handmade paper that I get. There's an art shop near me called Art Mart that has a wonderful selection of just absolutely gorgeous papers, including marbled papers and all of that fun stuff. And handmade papers, Italian papers, just a wonderful selection. They're not cheap, but a book like this or a sheet like this, I can get a lot of mileage out of. So what I'm going to do is trim this down to roughly what I need. Okay, I've got two pieces that are the same. In this particular case, these are cut, you know, from different parts of the paper, but that's okay. There isn't a pattern here, or really a rhyme or a reason as to how this texture is on here. So it will be just fine. I actually think now I need to decide which I want on the front, which I want on the back. And just taking a look at all of this to decide. I think I know you're like, well, it's not that much different. It all looks the same, but it doesn't. There are darker pieces and lighter pieces, and I'm just eyeballing this based on what I know I'm going to do to the front of it. I'm just getting an idea. I'll probably come in a little bit further on that. And I've got a terrible glare. That's pretty. That's a pretty piece. Okay, I think what I'll do, it makes sense for me for the darker piece to be on the back actually, which, let's get this straight. That reminds me, what I typically do before I start gluing is somewhere in the middle where I can still see it. I mark the inside as front and back, just so I don't lose sight of that, because once I cover this, they're gonna look identical. Okay, next up, I'm going to add some, or glue this down. I'm going to use, in this particular case, I think I'm going to use matte medium. And so, yeah, that's pretty. Okay, so I'm going to get out the matte medium. I'm going to lather this up with matte medium and glue it down on both the front and the back, and I'll be back. Okay, I've got a layer of matte medium on here. You could use just about any type of glue that would work with paper. You can use PVA glue, which is nice. You could use Fabri-Tac, especially if this were a piece of fabric. You could use probably tacky glue. You need to think about the type of material that you're putting on here in relationship to the type of glue. So it's not a one glue fits all kind of thing with journals. I have probably 4 or 5 different types of glue, and I use different types of glue based on what I'm gluing down and what I'm gluing it to. In this particular instance, it's a bit of a paper to paper, but this is a very thick, this textured paper is very thick. So that gives me a few more options. If you're using a thinner sheet or a thin fabric, you of course don't want anything that's going to bleed through. So I strongly recommend that you take your glue and just test a small piece of your substrate or whatever you're adding on here, and then make a decision. So just remember, not all glues work for all situations. Okay. That's on there nice and snug. And I'm just gonna roll it. I'm rolling it just to get any clumps of glue, if you will, smooshed out, if that makes sense. That's particularly helpful when you're using something like a Fabri-Tac, where it goes on a little bit gloppier. Roll it around. Okay, it's nice. It's a pretty paper. I just love it. Okay, now I'm going to miter the edges. Now what that means is I'm going to take a chunk of this corner out, just so that it's not bulky when I fold things over, so that I'm not folding triple or quadruple, if you can see what I'm talking about here on the corner. So that'll be a nice, fold up my edges and fold over here. I can see the piece easily. You can see the corner piece that needs to be cut away. And I'm going to come at that at a slight angle. And I'm going to snip just outside of that corner in both pieces, so that I create a little bite out of that corner like that. I'll do the same here and here. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue the inside, glue these down onto the inside. And don't worry, I'm not worried about this part, anything on the spine or this little piece next to the spine. That's all going to get covered up in a later step. in this particular instance because I'm doing two separate front covers. Now, you can do this, of course, where you're using one solid piece for the whole thing. I'm just constructing this a little differently, but when I do the other cover, that's probably what I'll do, is just a single piece all the way around, and I can show that to you as well. Now, for this part, I'm not going to use the matte medium here. I'm going to, let me get this closed up. I'm going to use Fabri-Tac, and the reason is that it just gives me, it grips pretty quickly, and it also works beautifully on paper as well as fabric. On most papers, not all. Again, this is a very thick paper that I'm using, and so I'm going to get that right there on that edge so I have a nice gluing right on the very, very edge of the book. And think about the use of a book where they might be more vulnerable to wear and tear and use. That is also why I typically put, and you'll see that much later in the process, because one of the last things I do is I add metal corners to my journals. So just gonna smoosh that down. Get my excess glue off. Make sure I've got a nice clean edge here. And there we go. This particular journal will very likely also have a coating, a spray coating on the top because of the other pieces that I'm going to do to this. And so it will be sealed as well from the top to protect it from the elements and things like, you know, spills. Of course, you can't completely protect a book from spills, but you know, it is what it is. But I will protect this cover as much as I can so that it is nice and sturdy and lasts for a while, for quite a while. Okay, sorry, my sleeve has buttons on it. It's clinking on the, okay. And last, the other edge here. I typically do the short edge last, especially if I'm doing, you know, one big piece that goes all the way around. I will, let me turn around here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm getting a nice little layer of glue right there where that will fold over the edge. And then just lots of glue. I'm not afraid to use a lot of glue. No sense in being skimpy. Again, I don't want this to come apart. And from here, there we go. Just smoosh it down. Make sure it's nice and snug and that there's no gaps. And then you've got it nicely stuck. I also usually run the roller over it. Now, I've heard people say that they can't use enough pressure on a brayer. It doesn't take much. Just push down just a little bit when you're running the brayer over it. But if that is difficult for you to do, or you don't have a brayer, just come through this with your fingers and just keep pushing down on it and rubbing it, putting some pressure on it. Go to all your edges. There you go. Now, if I had wanted to, I could have measured this to where each turn-in was the exact same thickness, but it's not necessary. This will all be covered. This entire inside will be covered again, and all you'll see is a slight edge. You can see right here on the corner, I've got a little bit of exposure, just a tiny bit. You see that? That'll be covered. so I'm not worried about that. That's another reason too why I will tend to put book covers on. That just helps cover up those corners and protect them that much more. Okay, front is done. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the back. And maybe I'll get this a little more centered. Maybe not. Oh, that's pretty. Okay. I'll be right back. Okay, there you have it. I've got that glued down, and I am ready to move on to the next phase of this, which will be to work on, and see how it's got this beautiful, it's got this nice dark edge here, which is gorgeous. And this paper is absolutely beautiful. I just love it. I had run out of it. I had some, if you look at the very, very first video I ever posted, was a flip through of a Woodland journal that I had made for my daughter. And this paper was on the background. And so for this custom order, the person who asked for it asked me if I could, she basically said she just absolutely loved it. So I was out of it, but I was able to find some more, luckily. So yay. And now I've got more. So that's ready to go. Ready for me to start playing with. There's going to be an owl on the cover. And there'll be, I have to decide, I will probably paint some canvas to put on here. Mix some paint to match this. I think in the original Woodland journal, I left it just a natural color, but I really like the idea of, that just feels to me like it might get dirty quickly. So I like the idea of painting perhaps a brown spine color here, or maybe this lighter color. I don't know, I'll play with it. So a little more work to do on this one yet, but there it is. There it's ready for me to start playing with. So thank you for watching. I know this was just a simple video, at least I hope it was. And the idea is that you can see how easy it is to really get started. In this particular case, just getting an old book and going from there. You also could get, and look at, it's got, this paper is definitely gonna have to be sealed because it pees on you, brown stuff. Anyway, the point is that you can start with a book, an old book cover. It's probably one of the simplest ways to get started on a junk journal. That way you don't have to worry about measuring fronts and backs and spines and creating all of that. Also not very difficult to do, but from what's the easiest way to get started perspective, it's to grab a book that you can give new life to and gut it and use the cover, especially if it's a nice sturdy one and it's still in really good shape. So there you have it. I will be back for more later as I work through these journals. I will try to I'm creating a series here where I'm going from start to finish. So that's the start. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your support, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.